Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here and welcome to this week's episode of The Knife Guy. So what are we talking about today? So if you watched my most recent unboxing video, you'll know that I recently purchased my very first fully handmade custom pocket knife. This is a Francois Dutoit TF4. Sorry about the fingerprints, it's just kind of unavoidable. Mirror polished Damacore, polished zirconium scales. We have a custom pivot. We have a Damacore backspacer. We have a Damasteel pocket clip. Anodized titanium liners. Fancy stuff, right? Expensive, etc. This is not a knife that anybody really needs. And I think that some people might find it surprising that I would say that, right? Especially if you're new to my channel. Aren't you like the knife guy that goes on and on and on about the justifications for expensive knives, right? I mean, you basically, sell people on expensive stuff. No, that's a conclusion that I think is totally reasonable to come to if you are experiencing my channel for the first time. Especially if you're new to knives in general. I think, most people in this day and age are on the defensive on social media because of how often we're being sold to. Everything feels like a sales pitch. It's really hard nowadays to tell the difference between show and tell and a sales pitch. I'm only going to speak for myself today because I believe that people who buy very expensive knives, we all buy them for slightly different reasons, right? But when you're new, it's hard to imagine that there's a reason to buy a knife outside of utility. So when you don't have context, the only conclusion that you can come to is that people who are talking about ultra expensive knives have somehow convinced themselves that these knives are more utilitarian than simple basic folding knives that are of reasonable cost, right? That's the conclusion that people come to. This guy's showing this really expensive folding knife. So either he truly believes that this will cut better than the average pocket knife. And in this case, thousands of dollars better than the average pocket knife, or he knows it won't and he's trying to deceive everybody. This sounds funny. The vast majority of you who are watching know that that's not true. And it'll sound funny to you. But this is the perspective, the default perspective that people take. And I don't think it's an irrational one. In fact, I don't think people have any choice but to conclude that because they don't know. They've never, that's the only if you're brand new, right? And you're just yeah, pocket knives are those things that they fold and you cut stuff with them. And they cost $20. Right? Imagine the shock of something like this. And there's a guy talking about you can see here that this has been mirror polished and the blade actually consists of 3 different compositions. Two of the compositions are the jacket, which are essentially elements that balance out the composition of the core, which is responsible for, essentially the cutting and this or that. The mirror polish will, of course, reduce drag and increase corrosion resistance. And then there's, of course, the zircon. And people are like, what? Why would anybody need this? This person is clearly trying to justify these elements. And I see through the mist. I see through the fog, right? This is something that we pride ourselves on as human beings. And it's it's absolutely a justifiable trait to have, right? To not let yourself be deceived when someone's trying to sell you something, right? We view everybody on social media, everything, every person, we view them as car salesmen. And coming from, ironically, someone who used to sell cars, I can understand that. We're constantly, everything is just being shoved down our throats all the time. So we're in this defensive stance, and we've become, a lot of us, in fact, I think most people have become very seasoned and are able to figure out what's a sales pitch, right? But a lot of times this has unnecessary crossover and, sometimes people who are just here's general information. Sometimes it comes off as, or sometimes it doesn't even come off as that, but people are so primed to criticize that, they they forget or they don't realize like this information might not actually be meant for me, right? Now this might come as a shock, but really, really, really expensive folding knives that are custom made are not meant for everybody. It sounds silly to say that out loud, but this is true. In fact, the people who make them know that. The people who buy them definitely know that. In fact, that's, pride of ownership is certainly one of the elements. This sounds really, pompous and nose in the air, but one of the reasons that people in general buy custom crazy folding knives is because they like to be able to say that they have something that not very many other people have or that almost nobody has, right? Now, I'm not trying to flex, but this is just factually an element. These very same people, despite what most people think, would generally not suggest that anybody needs to graduate into a territory where they are spending this type of money on knives. In fact, I don't think I've ever met someone who regularly buys custom knives that like aggressively pushes other people, especially new people, to buy the same knives. If you were to ask me, in fact, let me give you an example. This is actually the foundation for this week's episode. It made me laugh. This one, the reasoning behind it actually did not come from the comment section. This came from local friends. My buddies. I have a few buddies who have graduated into expensive knife territory, right? But a lot of my friends are just like, not for me. But they're still kind of like pocket knives, right? And every now and then, this has happened about 10 times, and it's always exactly the same thing. One of my friends will come up to me, and it's usually where we see each other is usually at the gym, or we see each other at the grocery store or something like that. And they'll stop me and be like, "Hey, listen, I've been meaning to talk to you. I know you're like the knife guy," which I just love. That's where the name of this series came from, the knife guy, right? Because everybody, you are the knife guy in your social, knife guy or gal in your social circle, right? So it's part, kind of it's a relatable thing. But my friends are going, you're the knife guy, right? It's one of a few things. I lost my old knife or I broke my old knife. And now, I know that you are like really into like the crazy, weird, expensive stuff, and they always have their hands up when they're telling me this. They get their hands up in the air, they're going to block something from happening. Like I'm getting ready to throw a dodgeball in their face. But they put their hands up and they're like, I'm not looking to spend, $300, $400, $500 on a pocket knife. I just want a regular knife. I just want something like 20, around like $20. And initially I was like, why do you have your hands up? Like, what makes you think that I'm going to try and push a $500 knife on you? And, but I realized, most recently I realized like this is happening pretty often. And if it's happening this often, it's not their fault. And when I started to think about it, I was like, well, of course that's the conclusion they come to. If you come to my channel and you watch 10 random knife reviews, you will likely get a wide variety in terms of price range, right? You'll probably watch a video about a budget knife, meaning a knife that's right around the $50 territory. And it's also likely that you'll watch a video about a knife that costs multiple hundreds of dollars. It's also likely that within one of those 10 videos, you'll see something ultra expensive or rare or weird, right? Something that has materials that you can't quite figure out what the utilitarian benefit of said material would be. But it's expensive because that material is on it, right? It's likely you will see a lot of different things. Now, the common person won't have an emotional response to a knife that costs $35 and looks like what they assume a pocket knife looks like. That is, yes. But they will react heavily to these other things that they're not familiar with. So therefore, this person that has stumbled onto my channel, watched 10 videos of 10 different things, or relatively different things, how they view me, their perspective of me, will largely be based on the most extreme of the information that is being presented, right? Now, when it comes to somebody talking about things that are incredibly expensive for reasons that go beyond their function, the default perspective to take, the most understandable perspective to take from a newcomer to this whatever community that they're getting information from is this is obviously, they're trying to sell me something, right? They're trying to sell me something I don't need. There it is. I don't need this, and I can see this for what it is, right? This guy has it's one of two scenarios. This is me being a new person watching my own channel. I see through this guy. There's one of two things going on here. Number one, this guy has existed in the ultra upper tiers of this, I didn't even realize it existed, but this luxury pocket knife world for so long that he's clearly lost, all foundation for what it means to have a utilitarian economic cutting tool. Or he knows that and he's trying to get people to buy him, right? There's no other possible explanation in their minds except for those two things, right? And again, considering where the world's at with social media and advertising and how every day, everything you look at, everything's an ad. Everybody's trying to get you to spend more money, right? Can we really blame people for coming to that conclusion? So, do I expect people to watch my entire... here's the irony. The vast majority of people who are watching Knife Guy right now, you guys already know this. It's very unlikely that this specific video is actually reaching the audience that I would like it to reach. Most of the people who watch Knife Guy you guys have watched my channel for a long time. So when I review something, I am comparing it to things that are in its general competition zone. And the information is meant for people who have already kind of decided that they want to buy something in this territory. They don't need to be convinced about what makes it cost. That's why I don't go into too much detail, because I'm they don't need to be convinced about what makes it cost. They just want to know, okay, I know what tier it's in. I know that. I just want to know, versus a general competition and how it feels and all of that, all elements considered. Do you feel like it's, a good decision? That I try to cater it based on who I think is watching. Because, if I didn't do that, then every single review would be all right, so here's how all of the tiers of knives work. First, we have the general material itself and the base, value of said material. And then you have to consider where it's being made. And I already kind of do that, but can you imagine if I took every single potential viewer step by step and it would actually come off as less informative and more of a sales pitch, right? So I don't do that. But I also, it's in the same sense, I don't expect people, it's to go and watch all 3,000 of my uploads to gain perfect context as to what's going on. So I can't blame them. I can't blame people for getting confused, right? And, usually after that, after they have, they've decided that this is a deceptive sales pitch, right? Or it's based on, reasoning that has become detached from its original foundation. At one point, this guy probably did know what it meant to have a good, utilitarian cutting tool that wasn't, all dressed up with pomp and frill. But he's clearly lost his way, right? After you've determined that, there's one of two things. The next step is usually to get mad. And that's where we see the comments everybody here is an idiot and this is clearly stuff that nobody needs. And you can tell there was confusion first and then a conclusion based on minimal context and then an angry comment or something like that. Now, most people don't, I say most of the time, most people, the vast majority of people who watch it, they just go, I don't understand that. I'm just going to leave. The vast majority of people who happen across my content or other content that's like it, that's what they're going to do. They're going to go, what did he say the price was? $800? This isn't for me. And that's fine, right? It's not we can't force people. It's no, wait, there's this whole interesting, it's it's okay. It's not going to be for everybody, right? But to some people, it has to be, this is how they simplify it, right? And it's, again, human beings do this. we don't want things to be overly complicated. We want them to be simple, and we want them to be explainable based on what we have already experienced. Past a certain age, we don't really like to be introduced to new concepts or new things outside of our understanding. Like things that challenge our perception of how things work, especially when it comes to the value of things. Past a certain age, we do not like to have new things implemented, right? Like, okay, let me speak for myself here, and as somebody who has recently ventured into the world of watches. For the longest time, I hated when somebody would talk about Rolex watches. We're like, oh my God, Rolex watches? You mean those watches that like freaking rich people wear I'm already in my own world. Like somebody says the word Rolex, and then I'm still part of this plane of existence with this person I'm talking with. Rolex watches, you mean those watches that, and as soon as I start right here, I start to say those watches that like rich people wear to show off because they paid all this money for something that all it does is tell time. Then while I'm doing this, like this other person that I was talking to doesn't even exist anymore. I'm just in like this black void where I am, my frustration at this, this inanimate object that I internally admittedly, know nothing about, right? This thing exists. I don't understand it. I'm not going to admit that out loud, right? But I'm making myself feel better through my anger about it, right? To me, there is no other explanation. It is an object of pure luxury, an object of deception, an object that was forced upon, the wealthy sheep of society. And I am smarter for having seen through the fog of this, right? In reality, nobody was trying to sell me a Rolex watch. Nobody was trying to sell it, right? Nobody. The watch community, the folks who are into them, none of them knew I existed or cared whether or not I was interested, right? But I was mad at this thing. I'm like, this thing tell time? Watch tell time. I can get watch tell time for less at Walmart. Expensive watch tell time. Expensive. Dumb. Right? I simplified it for myself, right? To justify my frustration towards it. I was confused. I didn't understand. But to me, I didn't need to understand. I already knew, right? In that moment, the last thing that I wanted is for someone to explain to me why it costs that much. Now, admittedly, right, after having I'm not an expert, but after having like dipped my toes in, I definitely have come around a little more to understanding, like, especially when it comes to watches that are 500 or 1,000, I'm like, oh, okay, that does actually make a little bit more sense, right? The more I look into it, it's just like with knives. I have, experienced more, and I'm now more willing to expose myself to more, little bubbles of information, right? But within, throughout this path, it's a winding path with multiple roads, and there's fog all over it. But as I continue to explore, right, I'm like, okay, this particular path seems a little bit more friendly. It feels like I can navigate this a little bit better, right? Gaining experience and knowledge, and when it comes down to is personal preference, right? Value based on personal preference. Now, if I continue to aggressively push down this path, I'll understand more. Will I sell myself more on things that I don't need? Well, yes, but at least you can kind of understand a little bit better and gain, an idea of what you would prefer if you were going to spend X amount of money, right? People say, don't get into watches, it's a slippery slope, right? Yeah, I found that out from going down that path. My point is that stupid, $30,000 Rolex watch that only those pompous celebrities wear and flash, and my original perspective has changed dramatically. I still am like, that's a lot, right? But I understand it a little more now, and I'm less, I'm no longer the type of person that wants to kick in the doors of this community and scream at everybody for being stupid. That's where you start. You start at that level because you don't know, right? The more you learn, then it's more likely you walk in and you're like, yeah, I'm not quite where you guys are at, but I kind of, yeah, that's cool. Have fun. Like that's kind of more, you can always tell who's been around for a little bit, right? The kicking and screaming and pointing out that everybody else is dumb and you're a rational consumer, it's like putting a big neon sign above your head that says, I have absolutely no idea what is going on here. And I'm afraid, and I'm alone, and I just want to lash out. But again, that's not a silly conclusion to come to. I mean, what can we expect, right? So it's the same idea. The main thing that I want to point out here after 21 minutes of ranting and almost losing sight of the original topic is the people who actually buy expensive knives, and it depends on what your perspective of expensive is, they will not, contrary to what new people believe, we will not force this stuff down your throat. A $50 knife, I've always said that I think, people who are just starting out should absolutely explore the $20 to $50 territory first, because there's a lot of good stuff there. And truth be told, most people will get by for a big chunk of their life with one knife from this territory if it's used correctly. I think that, spending a little bit more money, you can definitely gain some more benefit, especially if you have a very specialized occupation. But largely, since the beginning of the channel, I've maintained that the point of diminishing returns is about here. The Ritter Hogue, which now is, what are they, 170, something like that. Beyond that, I mean, I think it's something that it'll come as a surprise to, a newer person to hear me say, or other people like me, that both the Ritter Hogue and this multi-$1,000 custom knife will essentially do exactly the same thing. If it's not clear yet, the reason that people buy ultra custom knives is not because we are, trying to convince ourselves of some imaginary elite utilitarian element. No, we've just come to appreciate different elements when we buy these things for ourselves, regardless of whether or not they go beyond utility. But we don't lose sight of what the original function of the item is, right? There's just different classifications, different labels and things. There's different tools that we use when we are determining what we want to buy to make ourselves happy. But your goal is different depending on which path you're on and what part of the journey you're on. Somebody coming up and asking me to recommend them something, it depends on who they are and where they're at, right? If it's somebody who's brand new, I'm not even going to mention. If it's somebody who is truly brand new, I had somebody ask me, said, my son is turning 13 and I want to get him a pocket knife. I told him that, you might be able to suggest something. So we were sitting there talking. The last thing that I could imagine doing is being like, listen, kid, whatever you think throw it out the window. All right. Anything that you can you've ever seen in a Walmart display case, trash. Let me tell you something. Real knives, they start at $1,000. So don't even think about it until you can afford a true. That would be ridiculous. That is a ridiculous thing, right? No one would do that, right? And again, the vast majority of people watching right now, you know that. But I'm telling you, based on conversations I've had in person, comments I've seen on my channel, other channels, on Blade forums, on Reddit, various people have this absolutely ridiculous, view of people who have climbed the ladder and, regularly buy things that they consider to be wildly expensive and unnecessary, right? No, this was a situation where I said, "What do you like? Do you like? I mean, are there brands that you've had? And came to find out that this kid had basically bought knives in areas that were the equivalent of gas stations, which is completely and totally understandable, right? They just wanted like a simple assisted pocket knife. We landed, I suggested a few Kershaws, and because that's what he wanted, right? That's what would make, right? I wasn't going to be like, everything that you know and like is dumb, and I'm going to like, I said, here's a bunch of different things. Some of them are assisted and non-assisted, but if you really like the assisted stuff, I take a look at Kershaw. There's just a lot. I gave him options, and options that were reasonably priced. He's 13. Whether he was going to buy it or his parents are going to buy it, right? It would be ridiculous to be like, here's a few suggestions. They are all under $400. No. You cater the information to the person who's asking based on what they've experienced and, more importantly, what they actually want, right? So when I review a knife, when I give information on a knife, I try very hard to consider who I think is actually watching, and amongst that viewing audience, who I think is actually considering making a purchase. This is not a perfect system. In fact, my entire thought process is not a perfect one. As is the case with all thought processes, including the people that I was kind of poking fun at in this episode, it's flawed. There's always room for improvement, right? So if you're new, don't be intimidated. Don't think of the knife community as this gated, very blind, and just everyone is just like this. Oh, yes, you can join the ranks when you've earned it. No one is going to try and jam $1,000 knife down your throat. No one is confused as to whether or not the thing functions any better than no one is confused about that. We are here to help. Most of us will give you the right information, and most of us still enjoy things of multiple tiers, right? Not all people who graduate into the world of, crazy expensive knives forget the love that they had for less expensive knives. I still regularly purchase knives that are very inexpensive. When I get a lot of stuff given to me, but I still regularly enjoy things in lots of different tiers, but for different reasons, right? So anyways, this was a weird episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you did enjoy this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.